My name is Lisa Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington State Microenterprise Association. And I'm really excited to be here. The work we do around the state that supports the nonprofit microenterprise development organizations is really critical to help the very smallest businesses in the state thrive with business training, technical assistance, and microloans. And what we know is that all of these nonprofits around the state do Herculean work. They're patient. They spend time with these entrepreneurs. They walk them through the process of understanding cash flow projections and their marketing strategy. And what we also know is that when time is spent with these businesses, they are able to get steady and sturdy and grow, hire more people, grow to new locations, be able to be sent on to the Economic Development Council or small business development centers or Main Street Partners. So our nonprofit microenterprise development organizations all over the state are part of this larger business development ecosystem. And we're honored today because we have some excellent speakers, and we're working to really shine a light on serving entrepreneurs with disabilities. Entrepreneurs with disabilities are in every community, and some would say that we have not done a very good job at reaching them and serving them with appropriate services, relevant services, timely services, especially Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And what we know is that the opportunity is now. And so we're going to learn from these speakers, and then we're going to learn from you. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. But I want to thank Shri Reeves-Spare, who's here as a support for WSMA. And I'd like to introduce our three speakers. And first is Christiana Obe-Sumner. She is an entrepreneur herself and a person with a disability, but also just a leader in this space. And I'm going to have each of these speakers do their own introductions, but I'd like to begin just in introducing her and welcome Christiana. Thank you so much for being here. And then we have Emerson Seekins. He is the executive director of the Northwest Access Fund. And they are in multiple states doing incredible services and support for entrepreneurs with disabilities and people with disabilities, not focused solely on entrepreneurs. And you all have been around in the state for, 20 years or more. So we're honored to have you here. And also joining us is James O'Brien, or Jim O'Brien, with the Washington State Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And we're grateful that you're here, James, because you have this background and fundamental understanding of entrepreneurs and kind of what they need. Although you don't have the resources that you would like to have to serve them, you are an anchor agency in the state that has resources that have supported entrepreneurs in the past. And what we know is that when we lower the barriers to self-employment or lower the barriers to business ownership, entrepreneurs and business owners can create wealth. And what we want to do is make that easier for entrepreneurs with disabilities. So without further ado, I'd like to begin with Christiana and introduce yourself just briefly, and then we'll introduce the other speakers, and then we'll go into the full program.
Thank you for having me. My name is Christiana Obe-Sumner. My pronouns are they, them. I am a Black, Afro-Indigenous, non-binary, queer, disabled person. I identify as autistic, sick, and mad. I started my organization, Epiphanies of Equity, as a social equity consulting firm, and also a space that creates educational content based on innovative solutions, research, and theories, philosophies that we've learned. This organization came out of not just activism and organizing as a disabled person, as a workplace labor organizer, but also direct and witness to lived experience of racialized ableism, injustice, systemic ableism, systemic racism, systemic queer phobia, systemic transphobia, systemic fat phobia. And so there's a lot of those intersectional pieces that's part of the work that we do. So in addition to the experience of what it means to be a person who came from institutionalization and SSDI, going through various programs for disabled folks for both in-person and entrepreneurial work, and in the process of navigating how to even start a business as a disabled person with IDD, there is a lot that I'm excited to share with y'all today. So thank you.
So honored that you're here. I've learned so much from you so far. So thank you. Emerson, would you go next?
Yeah, absolutely. As Lisa said, my name is Emerson Seekins. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Northwest Access Fund. We're a nonprofit community development financial institution. Our founding purpose was to help folks with disabilities and older adults affordably finance assistive technologies. So hearing aids, wheelchair accessible vehicles, Braille devices, you'll name it. I'm excited to go more into depth into my presentation later. But we've also run a small business program in the past and have learned lessons about working with entrepreneurs with disabilities that we're excited to share. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Emerson. And James.
Hi, good afternoon. And I go by Jim O'Brien, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a manager with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. I supervise a couple of offices between Snohomish and King County, but I also help manage our internal self-employment resources and processes. And I'll go into more detail about what we do, but we are referred to as the Public VR program. We're publicly funded through the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And we provide a multitude of services to support individuals with disabilities to find a pathway to employment for those individuals. We're happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, all three of you. So as we begin, I just want to have a shout out to the Department of Commerce here in Washington State that funds these and other programs. And we're honored to have them be a sponsor, as well as Black-Owned Business Excellence, a group of nonprofit organizations and other partners working to increase access and opportunity for Black-owned businesses. And so I wanted to just give the floor to you, Christiana, and thank you so much for just the breadth and the depth of experience that you bring to this space, and for your openness. I intended to introduce myself as Lisa Smith with she, her pronouns. So I'm grateful that you started with that, and just take this time to share. We have a lot to learn from you, and we're excited that you're here. So thank you. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I think this is one of those times where, I wanted to share some of the pathways of what I've seen as the process in going through entrepreneurship. And it was one of those things, so I make a formal PowerPoint, or would I say the things? I just wanted to just share some of that experientially, what I've personally experienced and what I've witnessed. And in true form, we'll share some of the areas for calls to action and potential gap areas for this. I never really thought I would be a business owner, and part of that is because of personal interest, and part of that is because of systemic and cultural narrative, especially being autistic and Black, and in my mid-30s, which means it all happened at the advent of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, which was ratified in 1990. One of the fun things about, I always say about public administration and policy, is that there's always two confounding variables. The first one is, unfortunately, when you sign a policy, there isn't a magical sort of wave that goes over the land, and everyone sort of wakes up the next morning and thinks like, my spidey senses are tingling that a policy has been written somewhere and I should be more equitable today. So unfortunately, even though you have rights-based frameworks like the ADA or even the Civil Rights Act, which was less than 60 years ago, it was only about 58 years ago, there is still the process of implementing it. And I think in a lot of ways, we are still doing that to this day. The second confounding variable is, and I say this as a consultant when I work with especially public administration, is I can write the most equitable policy that's perfectly written. And then on top of that, folks have to interpret it with their brains and their body minds, and then implement it in a way that is congruent with the intention of it. And I think that's the other sort of confounding variable to this story is sometimes, most times, oftentimes, when that interpretation process and implementation process happens, without the representation of folks who represent the intersectional lived experiences of the largest disparity areas, the interpretation will be done with perhaps a strong amount of knowledge, but perhaps not the wisdom of the direct lived experience of what it means to navigate through those systems. One activity I do as a consultant sometimes in these cases is to ask folks to go through the process themselves in sort of a assessment practice, so to speak, to see how difficult it may be. So I grew up with folks who were entrepreneurs and in some cases traditionally, but in most cases non-traditionally. And I say that as an equitable way of saying a family who found survival work to be the entrepreneurship. And so there's a piece of that too in this story. Anyway, now that my preface is over, you know, especially in the ways that our systems work, there's these drop-off ages that of services, and that's where in some cases the services like Division of Voc Rehab or other services specifically for disabled folks can really help as adults to continue some of the support that you lose when you turn 18 or 23, depending on where you live. In addition to that, however, if you're not able to get into these sort of services, either because you are self-identified as disabled or you're not able to access, say, the healthcare needed to get the formal diagnosis that is needed to be able to access these services, there isn't a lot of support in these systems to be able to do that. Some of the concerns, especially in terms of entrepreneurship for folks with disabilities, especially folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities or IDD or otherwise neurodivergent, is even understanding what it is that you need to do. As I've seen in myself and my family, just knowing what sort of business type you should be, what the taxes mean, how to determine what your federal taxes, your quarterly taxes, what is a B&O tax, what is an annual report, what does it mean for you to be an LLC? You need insurance. There's a thing called business insurance. What is that? So and a lot of those things when you look at it are written in accessible language. So there is those pieces as well. I think what's important for folks who are watching this to consider in terms of entrepreneurs with disabilities is, first of all, what is the intersectional representation? And if that intersectional representation is missing, then what can you do to address it? A lot of times we might get focused on a specific community or lived experience, but as Audre Lorde, I think, said, is we're not single issue beings because we don't live single issue lives. If you're doing this work because you're trying to help disabled folks, there are queer, trans, non-binary disabled folks, there are Black, Brown, Indigenous disabled folks, there are under-resourced disabled folks, and there's also queer, trans, non-binary, Black, Brown, Indigenous, under-resourced disabled folks. Being able to see the intersection of those and to look around your organization and say who's missing is really important. The next step is to look around at the people who have resource holding, policy making, decision making power, and determine whether or not those intersections are reflected in every aspect of leadership in true meaningful ways, meaning that they also have the power to make the changes and make the recommendations and be held to the point where they're actually able to move those needles forward. As an entrepreneur, as it's specifically a Black, Indigenous, and disabled entrepreneur, there's also difficulties in how there continues to be inequity in how that works. Not only inequity in terms of how people hold your experiences of inequity, especially if you are, sometimes called a wounded healer or someone with direct lived experience of some of those areas, but there's also some concerns around how the process of creating a business or even the type of business can be held and to continue to have that sustainable, especially without some of the systemic supports. Meaning in this is that as a consultant, I went out to I created a small group of folks who are of different experiences who also do social equity consulting. And I found within my small group, so teeny tiny convenient sample of people who I realized some of us get asked for references and some of us get asked for recommendations. The difference is that a recommendation is something that you can get after you're done with a client if they are pleased with your service, that you can create like a sheet of reviews. A reference is different in that they're wanting to like directly call and ask questions, and especially if you're doing client-based work, can impact your sales pipeline. So now you have to choose between more work or in impacting your previous partnerships, which if that is not happening systemically is harmful. And finally, even just doing something where you'd be seen as an authority, such as consulting, could be seen as difficult because there's like the 8 F's of disability employment, where most disabled folks are sort of corralled into certain sort of services that would not allow for this. Why am I talking about lack of systems when DVR is literally right here? Because I think it's also important to discuss the limitations of folks like DVR, the limitations of the funding, not their limitations, but the limitations of the systems around them. How much funding they're allowed to have, what some of the requirements are to be able to access the service, especially if you don't have some of the diagnostic criteria to do so, and how the balance between things that are based in rights-based frameworks, whether it's the ADA, whether it's the Civil Rights Act, can somehow have a gap of understanding with the liberatory and equity framework. So the difference between disability rights and disability inclusion and disability justice, I think, is causing quite a stir in the disability community right now as folks seek to move towards a liberatory framework, and we're still waiting for the systems and the policies to catch up. So part of this is too a call to you all watching this as you are listening to the rest of the speakers and you're saying, wow, I want to continue to help disabled folks. Thinking about ways that we could all come together, not just to add additional resources into systems that we have, which is extremely important, but how can we move towards a true liberatory framework where we no longer have to worry so much about the bureaucracy and scarcity of resources for true community integration, especially given some of the systemic racism and harm. There's a lot of this story that I wish I could share, but I only have like 6 minutes. And so it's a piece of it that I think I would call folks to go say, especially to Twitter, the disability community is on Twitter. There are some folks that I would say like Lydia XZ Brown, I would say Alice Wong, Taylor McGee, and some other folks who does great disability justice work at the intersection of racialized ableism, who I would say to follow. And my call to you would be to follow disabled thought leaders, disabled entrepreneurs, disabled business owners, and especially those that are Black, Brown, Indigenous. follow and read and about their experiences and their calls to action without direct engagement for at least a month or so, similar to holding space and sort of listening and for understanding as opposed to listening for response. And I encourage you to continue to reach out to the community, the Black, Brown, Indigenous community, to learn more about how to incorporate disability justice systemically or institutionally. You can always reach out to us as well to discuss how your team could either put this in place or learn more about these concepts, which would definitely take more than the time that I have. But yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. You know, we could have had the whole program just for you. And what I want to say is this is a beginning conversation for us. And my hope is that you'll come back with additional speakers, hopefully, to carry this conversation forward. Thank you for that very powerful introduction. And thank you for staying with us. And Emerson, you're next.
Okay, great.
I have so many things I want to share. I'll just wait to the end. So thank you, Christiana. Go for it, Emerson.
All right, I am going to share my screen with the PowerPoint. All right, so Northwest Access Fund, as I mentioned earlier, we're a loan fund that was designed to help folks with disabilities get access to assistive technology. We actually just went through an 18-month strategic planning process that finalized in 2020. And we talked to community partners, we talked to our clients, we talked to our funders, and really and we talked to the community. So what is the needed services that are that we can potentially respond to? And we built an infrastructure to really be able to help folks with disabilities on other ways having to do with their finances. So we offer loans as well as financial coaching, and then resources that promote access to assistive technology, independence, financial resilience, and life opportunities. We serve all of Washington and all of Oregon, all ages, all incomes, all disabilities. So I encourage, if you're working with an entrepreneur that needs financial coaching or assistive technology, to reach out to us, and I'll go more into that now. So I like to start off like that having a disability costs more money than it costs to not have a disability. You've got medical debt expenses, you've got added needs with regards to technology, different requirements where maybe, you know, grocery shopping support is not a luxury, but it's actually the thing that physically can get you the food you need, because you might not have another resource to be able to bring you groceries. And so folks with disabilities need to have more income to have the same standard of living, and they're also more likely to live in poverty. Often folks will, if they acquire a disability, they can, it's coming at a time where they need more money to live their life due to this added disability expenses, and they have variability in their income likely if they were employed before. And so I like to share the stat that 67% of all bankruptcies were tied to some sort of medical issue. And that's directly related to the fact that we're living in a for-profit healthcare system. And so only 1 in 3 folks with disabilities are employed compared to 1 in 9 adults that has a disability. And that is a strong statistic to share. Why do folks with disabilities need self-employment opportunities? And people with disabilities are actually twice as likely to indicate that they want to pursue self-employment. And that's for a variety of reasons, often based on somebody's disability. So somebody might need flexibility throughout the day. They might need to be able to not work because they might be having some access needs that is not going to be compatible with going into work. And then you also face systematic discrimination in employment. And so you've got folks that are trying to get employment positions but are not being hired. And you still need extra money to support yourself with a disability. And so the 2019 statistics is that folks with disabilities were self-employed at twice the rate of people without disabilities. So yeah, then this causes significant financial stress amongst folks, and there's often a conversation that we have in our world is disability causes poverty and poverty causes disability. And so this actual stress, it has very, very taxing on mental health and stress and all those kind of things. And so outcomes that are relevant to self-employment is that folks with disabilities are 2 times as likely to use costly non-bank lending. So pawn shops, payday loans, rent-to-own stores. And so they're actually, with this income, they're not getting as far because of the access to certain credit products that they have available to them. And then they're also more likely to be late on a mortgage, overdrawn on checking accounts, and to take loans from a retirement account. So overall, the financial stability of folks with disabilities as a whole, if you were to run these stats through different lenses, through BIPOC communities, I'm sure that they would be more exaggerated due to systemic discrimination. Yeah, period. So, and then what's really relevant often for self-employment for folks with disabilities is being unbanked. So we work with a lot of folks that don't have access to a bank account. And so if they're supposed to be segmenting their income and having a business account for certain business expenses and income, but they don't actually have a bank account for their personal accounts, that can present a barrier. And so I share this. One, I want to make clear that these are statistics for an aggregate. These are not individual people that these are responsible for. So, and there's a spectrum of disability. You're working with folks who were born with a disability, and then you're working with folks with acquired disability. And with regards to their finances, they can have access to very different resources. So getting an assessment of where somebody is at personally with their financial circumstances often can be important, and particularly important for folks with disabilities due to benefit systems through Social Security. So there's generally 2 types of benefits that a person with a disability will receive that gives them income as well as health insurance. And so you've got supplemental security income, SSI, that comes with an monthly income of $794, and it is attached to Medicaid. And if somebody has more than $2,000 in their bank account, they will be ineligible to receive SSI and will potentially lose their Medicaid. So it's important that you know somebody's income, because if you're going to be lending them money, that money shouldn't filter through their account due to the potentially impacting of their benefits, as well as caregiving benefits. So literally the resource that's going to be able to help you achieve your daily life. The second benefit is Social Security Disability Income, SSDI. And this is for folks that have 19 quarters or more of work experience associated with their Social Security number. And they'll be eligible for income based upon needs that are demonstrated that they have a disability that meets their definition. And this comes with Medicare after 2-year waiting period. So it doesn't automatically come with health care. And each benefits react very differently to employment, unearned income, resources, living arrangements, and they have different health insurance and benefits amounts, and there are different timelines associated with each. So my main goal with this is to really emphasize benefits planning, that if you're working with an entrepreneur with a disability, really make sure that they're connecting with a benefits expert. The Social Security Red Book is, this thick, and it comes with all these different details with exceptions and circumstances. And I like to say this, that I'm hoping to scare the crap out of you just enough to know that you can't do this on your own, and having a little bit of information can actually do a lot of damage to somebody. So you want to have someone go to the benefits planner, pulling their benefit from Social Security to be able to get the exact information about what benefits that they're on, so that they can discuss what having income will look like, and how reducing your or increasing your income, what might that reduce your benefit? Might that also increase your payment for healthcare for workers with disabilities, which is the caregiving benefit tied to Medicaid in Washington state? And so please know that there are people that know this Social Security book back and forth. We actually are have benefits planners on staff, and be happy to work with you one-on-one to connect with somebody on this issue. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but tips generally that we've worked with experiencing working with people with disabilities is that connect with them about their access needs, about their technology needs. Some folks might need more technology to be able to go into their business of choice. And then if there's a loan involved, as I mentioned earlier, really make sure that that funds go to the vendor directly and not through somebody's individual account. So that's important because, I was working with Business Impact Northwest and gave them a presentation on disability, and I scared them just enough to know to talk to somebody. And they were like, we are working with this screen printer and he's on SSI, and we're going to give him a $10,000 loan for this screen printing press. And I was like, great. And but at that point, they had a check written directly out to this guy. And I was like, this is going to mess with him so much. So you need to buy the thing directly for him. And that actually, it does not run afoul of Social Security at all, because it's an obligation that somebody's responsible for paying for it. And so wanted to talk a little bit about our financial coaching program, that we can help with budgeting, bank accounts, check systems reports, ABLE accounts, which are savings accounts that are for folks with disabilities of age that got their disability before the age of 26. And then credit building is something that we do. We have this opportunity loan that is for up to $3,000 and up to a 5-year term, where all of the payments are sent to the credit bureaus, and so can really establish or reestablish somebody's credit. We ran a micro entrepreneur program with up to $10,000 for a startup business, up to $25,000 for a well-established business. I pulled the numbers of our loans, and almost all of them were for under $3,000. And that was because we were working with folks to get access to modest technologies, maybe a smartphone that they need to potentially enter the gig economy, and other kind of unique assets for whatever their small business is. And so with that, we realized that other lenders are doing great work in the small business space, and we really, our special sauce is to focus with folks on credit building and to get them these lower dollar cost items. And so I will, our opportunity loans that we've done past have been for employment or self-employment, as I mentioned. Also, they can be used for rental security deposits and moving costs, paying off some high interest debt, dental work, winter fuel. We did one February storm. We had to get winter fuel for somebody's RV, as well as to pay off their cell phone bill, because that was the main way that they communicated with their, their healthcare providers and various, furniture. So I will, some of our borrowers, and then I will stop share and leave it to the next person. Yeah, Jim. Yeah.
Emerson, thank you. And I know that you could also spend an entire hour presenting on this and these resources. So thank you very kindly. And thank you too for having a PowerPoint. Sometimes it's great to have a PowerPoint holiday, and so sometimes it's great to have one. So I want to make sure everyone on this call and those who registered will get a link to this webinar and to all of the PowerPoints, as well as contact information for the speakers. So just to let you all know that. So thank you. And so now, James, take it away.
Okay. Again, I'm with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. We are a division of the much larger Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, in the state of Washington. We're also part of WorkSource. I'm sure many people have seen WorkSource centers, the outward facing entity that is funded through the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, referred to as WIA. We are part of that, although our program funding comes specifically through the Rehabilitation Act, which provides about 80% of our funding. It's federal. And then we have a state match of about 20%. It varies a little bit from biennium to biennium, but the publicly funded vocational rehabilitation program has been around a long time. We actually in 2020 celebrated our 100th anniversary. And so the program has been around. Many changes. We're not much like the program that was funded in 1920, but we've been around. So quick overview of DVR. We provide services to individuals who want to work, but who need assistance due to a physical, sensory, cognitive, or mental health disability, really any disability. Now, there is another program in Washington State, the Washington State Department of Services for the Blind, referred to as DSB. They are our federal funded partner, and they specialize in serving individuals who are blind or have low vision. That's their expertise. They're funded through the same law. It's just in Washington State, the decision was made some years ago to have a separate program. Some states have a combined program. But we do serve all disabilities, including blindness, if somebody wanted to work with us instead of DSB. DVR counselor, we call them vocational rehabilitation counselor, works with each individual one-on-one to design a customized step-by-step plan to achieve the desired goal. And that plan is an individualized plan for employment. Everybody that comes to DVR does get a unique, customized set of services tailored to meet their needs and based on their experiences and their disability related barriers. So our program is not made to be a cookie cutter approach to work. And I'll go through our process just briefly in a second, the next slide. Self-employment or supported self-employment is an employment outcome in which an individual works for profit in his or her own business, profession, or trade. And supported self-employment is referencing an individual who comes to DVR with a significant disability that requires they have some form of support through a support system in order to be employed. And so envision somebody with a traumatic brain injury or somebody with an intellectual or developmental disability who may always require some kind of support. We refer to that as supported self-employment. We provide professional feasibility analysis, business planning, and startup monitoring and support to entrepreneurs with disabilities. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but it is important that people know that we're not actually we're not a CDFI, we're not a micro enterprise program. Self-employment is not 100% of what we do. We're really more of a traditional path to wage employment, but self-employment is something that we can support for some individuals. That means that we don't always get it quite right, but we do lean on some people to try and help us. And that's why we value the partnership of some of you out there listening. Our financial support is provided for startup costs. Again, sometimes giving money to people can cause problems. So buying things is what we do. And we do not require any form of repayment. Our support is not through loans. Nor does a person have to come forward with their own personal resources or a match to get our assistance. The DVR process, it's outlined in the federal law, begins with an application. A person would come to DVR and apply for services, and a DVR counselor will walk through the process of becoming eligible. Eligibility for DVR is quite simple. It's just we have to understand their disability, learn about their disability, be able to understand how their disability has created a barrier to them in getting a job, keeping a job, or advancing in employment, and that we believe our services would be able to make a difference. That does mean that we have to collect some information about that individual's disability so we can understand it. However, the good news is if someone does not have medical insurance or has not seen a professional that is qualified to diagnose their disability, we can pay for all of those assessments that are necessary. So we can pay for medical, psychological, or other kinds of evaluations to get them eligible for our program. So that's not a barrier to eligibility. Due to some funding limitations, there are times where we have a waiting list. And if someone has a disability that does not place them at a level at the top of our list, they may experience a wait for services. And the waiting list is based on the significance of their disability and how their disability affects them. We move then into vocational assessment, and vocational assessment is where we begin the process for someone who wants to be self-employed of feasibility analysis. and learning about the business and why they want to be an entrepreneur and running some numbers. We would then move into the development of their individualized plan. And it's at that time that we would consider developing a comprehensive business plan. And then once we've moved into startup, we then provide hands-on startup support and monitoring. Now, because DVR counselors are counselors and they know about disability and barriers to employment, they are not experts on microenterprise and self-employment. So we contract with external business consultants to provide us with that level of expertise. We have a list of approved self-employment consultants that we utilize that cover the state. And we utilize them at 3 key points in the process: the feasibility analysis, the comprehensive business plan, and then the startup monitoring and support. So we rely on their assistance and their expertise in helping us support the entrepreneur with a disability. We do value partnering with other programs, microenterprise programs, or other programs in the community that can help us support that customer. We do our best work when we're surrounded with a circle of support, a team that individual can also bring forward to help us in supporting them in their path. DVR counselors, they are disability experts, and they are available to external programs and partners for consultation on disability-related issues, accommodations. We do have on staff as well certified benefits planners. We make sure we provide benefits planning, as Emerson covered, to all of our customers, and especially those who are looking at self-employment. And there's my contact information. I know the website will be provided as well. And thank you. Oh, I think you're muted there.
Thank you so much. I appreciate just how much your agency has on your plate, and the small part of that plate that's dedicated to self-employment, but that there are resources available. I want to give the folks in the room, our Zoom room, an opportunity for questions. And then I have several questions for the presenters. What I'm really moved by is just the extraordinary amount of work and stress and complications that a person with a disability has just living, let alone having enough income to live on, let alone starting a business, and how these systems that these entrepreneurs have to navigate are embedded with complexities and systemic racism and barriers that would take a well-educated person a hard time just to navigate on their own, let alone having any disability that makes it even more complex. And I was also just really, moved by the caution, Emerson, that you shared about being careful if an entrepreneur gets a microloan to pay the vendor so that doesn't complicate or put into jeopardy their benefits. And just Christiana, your wisdom about the lived experience. If there's one thing to have a program, but if that program wasn't informed by people who have a lived experience, and if that policy wasn't designed by them, and if the implementation of that policy and those procedures weren't informed by these people with lived experience, with that intersectionality, then it's going to be really hard for these policies to have ultimate benefit. And so we, all of us, need to be more informed. And I appreciate you sharing the names of these folks out there who are doing this work every day, who are trying to work and improve these systems. And I so appreciate your calls to action, actually, all of you. I also just am grateful to know that right now, if any of the nonprofits on this platform or in this room have an opportunity to serve a person with a disability and they need financing, that they can go and speak with a benefits planner with Northwest Access Fund, or they can go meet with a DVR vocational counselor if they have a small business, and potentially get access to a specialist that can walk them through the process of feasibility or writing a business plan, and ultimately potentially get funding. And that there are resources out there and experts who can walk them through the process is really powerful to me. I'm also really present to how much is missing and what we need to do differently to fill in the gaps. So I wanted to just open up and see if there's anyone with questions. There were a couple of them early on. One question, Emerson, was, what is the interest rate on the loans, that $3,000 loan? If you could just share that.
Yeah, it's a 5% interest rate, and we pair it with financial coaching. And we really, in the part of the loan process, we encourage folks to communicate with us, because we know by definition the population that we're working with, that folks with disabilities have income volatility. And so if somebody's having a month where they can't make a loan payment, as long as they're talking to us, we will send it to the credit bureaus as paid as agreed, so that we don't want to harm somebody's credit throughout the process.
Great, thank you. And that was an excellent question from Twee Wen. There is also another question of if there are any grants available or just loans. And what I understood from you, James, is that if a person goes and speaks with a counselor, their business is ready, or they meet the criteria for getting assistance from one of your technical assistance providers or your self-employment consultants, and they go through feasibility, they write that business plan, it is possible in some circumstances where they could get a grant or funding that they don't have to pay back. Did I get that right?
Yeah, but not in the sense that we would give them money.
No, you would pay the vendor.
We would buy the things.
Right.
So if the business plan or the feasibility analysis said that they needed, these 15 pieces of equipment and then some marketing assistance, we would then pay for that for them through, whichever vendors were being used.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes, great. Go, Christiana.
Yeah, I just want to also share, so like from entrepreneur side and what I've seen in my community. So like the beauty of intersectionality, and this is one of those things that was, even for myself, I had to think about, is that sometimes you'll say like, okay, I'm doing disability justice consulting, so I have to look for a disability justice grant, or because I'm disabled, I have to look for a disability focused thing. But like, as I was saying, like there are some folks who, they may not have, they're self-identified as disabled or something else going on. There's, like you were saying, there's a lot going on in terms of like what it would mean to even get a diagnosis, depending on some of your other intersectionalities. So a suggestion or a tip that helped me is, what are some other intersectionalities in addition to being disabled where you can also have an intersectional community to support? So like for me personally, like shout out to GSBA, who I was able to be a part of their small business incubator. And as part of that small business incubator, because I'm non-binary and queer, I was able to also receive support through that process for, through ventures was one of the things that they had. So we went through the ventures program. They helped me to figure out how to like apply for the certification for LGBTQIA+ business, all those different sort of things. So that would just also be like for grants and loans, especially as like a Black Indigenous person. There's like small business loans and grants for Black owned businesses, queer owned businesses, businesses led by folks of diverse genders. So really consider how your intersectionality plays out. And if you're an employer or you're working with folks, also consider how that intersectionality may come out as you're trying to help someone, because say there might be some complications, as they were saying before, in terms of supporting an employee if they say have their SSDI, and they're already in a situation because they're in an intergenerational household with someone else with SSDI, right? And so there's also some of those nuances where helping folks to navigate things that may not be as cut and dry as sometimes, we would hope for the ways that policies and systems are set up.
Excellent suggestion. So GSBA, and I don't know if Shri would put that in the chat, excellent organization serving amazing businesses. They also have grants. I think they're grants that come out every year for LGBTQ plus individuals. Anyone can actually apply. That's a great resource. Ventures, Business Impact Northwest, Enterprise for Equity. Many of the partners on WSMA's website do serve entrepreneurs with disabilities and offer grants and loans. So don't just think that there's just one avenue. There's multiple avenues of funding. So excellent suggestion. There was a question in the chat, and Ronita, who's a rock star, one of the grantees of our program, Renita asked, can an individual who has a past client with DVR reopen their services or case for self-employment support without going on a wait list for services? And that's a question for you, James.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's kind of a two-part answer. So if a person had previously worked with DVR and their case with DVR was closed successfully, meaning they were employed, whether it was self-employed or otherwise, and then they require some additional assistance later, they can contact DVR and request what is called post-employment services. And it's a way for us to step back in quickly without a new application and assist a person. And so that only is available for individuals who have been through the program and were closed successfully working. If a person was closed otherwise, say maybe they didn't make it through the process, they elected to leave in the middle, or it didn't result in employment, that would be a new application. There is no limit to the number of times a person can apply for DVR. And whether or not a person will experience a wait, it depends on the significance of their disability. So how does their disability impact them in functional loss areas? And it's kind of a complicated process, but a DVR counselor, after obtaining information about their disability, determines whether or not they meet our criteria for customers that can immediately be served because of the significance of their disability, or may have to wait. And that's something that we definitely would talk through with that person at the time that they apply and after we've gathered information about their disability. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you for that. There are several other questions in there, Twee. I have actually an email with several links that I want to send you directly. And so just to know that. I wanted to ask all of you presenters, I know we're getting close to the end. If you have any specific examples of entrepreneurs you served or ways that your agency helped a business owner with disabilities overcome the barriers to self-employment. And anyone can go first.
I can start.
Go for it.
So we've been working with one gentleman probably for 6 years at this point, and he came to us right after leaving the prison systems, and was a new father and was accessing disability benefits. And he took our self-employment course it was a 7-week webinar, kind of the basics of building a business plan. Often the outcome of that is folks realizing that self-employment is not maybe their path, which I think is also a great outcome, is to have somebody figure out that what might not work for them. And so this gentleman, his biggest thing was he knew like fancy sneakers, and he knew kind of vintage clothing. And so we got him storage space, and also did an injection of a loan for inventory for him to get started. And then in the pandemic, we were able to provide him with a resilience loan to help him build up his inventory again. And he's making a supplemental income, which is often what we're helping to folks to get, helping folks access the gig economy. I'm not saying that that's a great way to live, but for folks with disabilities, you can literally turn the app on, make as much money up to your substantial gainful activity, and then turn the app off so not to run afoul of these Social Security rules.
Excellent. Either one of you, yeah, go for it, Christiana.
Yeah, so this is something that can be used either inside of a workplace or for entrepreneurs with disabilities. But I wanted to share about a term that I had developed from seeing a theme and having my own experience called hostile accommodations. And essentially a hostile accommodation, and I wrote an article for the South Seattle Emerald that I could share, but it's essentially what happens when you go into a situation, even as an entrepreneur, which was my story, and the process of accessing accommodations or asking for accommodations is made to be so difficult or labyrinthine that you either give up or you can't do it. In the South Seattle Emerald article, in my case, it was when I got my first commercial lease. And I was able to find an office on the ground floor in the Pioneer Building. I won't say the name of the place, but it's a Pioneer Building. The elevator is also, I think, as old as the Pioneer Building somehow, but it had this huge window. And especially as a neurodivergent person, I wanted to put a curtain. As a matter of fact, this sheer purple curtain over here, so that I didn't have people like walk through looking at me. They said, well, aesthetically, it's against our policy to have a sheer curtain. So if you want to have it, you should have to move your office to the second or fourth floor. I am sitting now, but I also, my chronic illness is that I also have mobility challenges. I use a cane or sometimes a wheelchair. So I was like, these elevators are terrifying. There's stairs I wouldn't be able to come down. I'm originally from the East Coast, but I know this particular area of the city has a history of burning down. I just don't, there's all these different sort of things. What do I do? Oh, well, we'll deal with it. And it was interesting that they allowed folks to come in and you gave me a stud finder to anchor my bookcases to the wall, but I couldn't put up a sheer curtain. The reason why I share this is because, especially as you start a business as an entrepreneur, systemic ableism and racialized ableism doesn't go away. As a matter of fact, now you have to navigate it without the support of already being within an institution and oversight of, say, an HR professional or a supervisor or manager that can have your back, or a union that can ensure that your rights are held. And so to consider how, whether it is that you are contracting with a disabled person, you are employing a disabled person, you're supporting a disabled person to start a business and navigate, what are some of those aspects of systemic ableism, racialized ableism that could be a hostile accommodation? What are perhaps some aspects of the systems that you are overseeing now that could be a hostile accommodation? And what are some ways that you could break down those barriers, either in a harm reduction approach or even to have proactive and preemptive strategies for navigating those barriers in the future? So I wanted to also share that, in that I think it's important to consider, as we're trying to save the world, what are some of the ways that we can save the world from ourselves? And that could be either personally or institutionally or culturally. And so I can put in the chat, if it's okay to do so, a link to the hostile accommodations article, which also has some suggestions on how to look through your business for that.
I would love that. Please do. And we will include that in the summary that we send out. And also, just is such a powerful reminder of what we all can do to listen, to really listen to what the needs of these entrepreneurs with disabilities are, and how to not just pay attention, but act on supporting them. Because it's not a safe world for everybody, and no one should have to work 10 times harder to just get the modicum amount of support to simply live and function and do your business. It needs to change. So I appreciate you sharing that. I know that we are running out of time, or we're near time. I don't know if James, you had an example that you wanted to share.
Out of respect for time, I guess what I would say is that, we're a program that serves thousands of people every year, and at least a couple of hundred that at least want to explore self-employment. And, really, I think what we provide is a counselor that can work with that person to really explore whether or not self-employment is the right choice for them. Sometimes just because of fear or lack of accommodation or other things that they run into as barriers, they begin to think self-employment is an option. And sometimes that is a good choice. However, sometimes they actually are looking for a job. And so counseling and guidance from a counselor, but also then, eliminating barriers like access to capital through the funding that we can provide, and then the expertise of an external business consultant is just really focused on helping reduce some of those barriers that we often see people with disabilities experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know for our organization, this is a beginning conversation. We will carry this to a next level. And I can't thank you enough, all of you speakers, for being here today, for opening up the conversation and just allowing us to navigate the first stage of where we need to go. There needs to be system change, and we are the ones to make that happen. And I appreciate your expertise, your time, your compassion, and your willingness to open the door to this very important issue. Thank you to those of you who attended today. We will send out this recording, including the chat and questions. I did see a question in here, James. If there are folks who want to become a self-employment employment consultant with DVR, if that is an opportunity, but there are limited spaces, and specifically if it's serving a group or a region or a population that isn't currently being served. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all. Have a great afternoon. This is Lisa Smith with the Washington State Microenterprise Association. Thanking you all for today's conversation. Take care.
Thank you.